Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the unexpectedly luxurious, faintly ridiculous world of pineapples in 18th century England. Imagine it's a foggy London evening. You're standing in a dimly lit Georgian drawing room. The candles flicker, your silk stockings itch slightly, and all eyes are fixed, not on the opera singer, nor the nobleman telling a long story about his travels, but on the table centerpiece, a single pineapple. Its spiky crown catches the candlelight like a jeweled crown, and its golden skin looks almost too perfect to touch. You'd think it was a sacred object, and in a way, it kind of is. Because, you see, in this time and place, a pineapple wasn't just a fruit. It was a statement, a flex, a small, spiky monument to wealth, ambition, and England's ever-growing obsession with exotic imports. You probably wouldn't survive this economy unless you knew how to fake pineapple ownership convincingly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how far this little storytelling corner reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You first meet the pineapple not in a fruit bowl, but on the deck of a ship. Picture yourself aboard a creaking vessel somewhere in the mid-1600s. The air smells like wet rope, salt, and ambition. Below deck, nestled among crates of tobacco and barrels of rum, are a few precious pineapples, clumsily packed, slowly rotting, but still deeply treasured. Pineapples are native to South America and the Caribbean, and their journey to Europe is long, bumpy, and often fatal. Most don't survive. They bruise easily, they rot quickly, and they are absurdly finicky about their climate. But those few that do arrive in England, they become instant celebrities. You get off the ship in a busy London dockyard and hand-deliver a pineapple, carefully cradled in silk, to an eager merchant. He holds it like it's a newborn child, wide-eyed and whispering to his assistant, "We've got one." Historians still argue whether the first pineapple in England arrived via Spain or Portugal, both of whom had earlier colonial outposts in the Caribbean. But there's consensus on this. Once pineapples hit London, they caused a commotion. People had never seen anything quite like them. They were golden, spiky, sweet, unapologetically strange. You stroll through Covent Garden in the early 1700s, and it's not uncommon to see shop signs or decorative moldings shaped like pineapples. You even pass a theater where an actor is rumored to have once eaten a slice of pineapple on stage, causing audible gasps from the audience. True or not, the tale spreads. There's a deep, almost irrational hunger for this fruit, not just to eat it, but to be near it, to own it, or failing that, to pretend you do. Because pineapples are expensive, like ruin your family lineage expensive. In some cases, they cost the equivalent of several £100s. More than a horse, less than a small estate. And yet, they start showing up in elite parlors, at lavish dinner parties, even in royal banquet halls. One noblewoman reportedly greeted her guests by standing next to a pineapple in her drawing room, as if it were an honored guest itself. "Don't touch it," she warned softly. "It's still ripening." She was lying, of course. It had ripened weeks ago and was probably already fermenting. But to admit that would have broken the illusion. You might be wondering, why pineapples? Why this fruit of all things? Well, part of it is timing. By the 18th century, England is expanding its colonial reach. The Caribbean is a key site of sugar production. Something you'll see is closely connected to pineapple trade. The fruit becomes a kind of edible emblem of empire, luxury, and exoticism. It whispers, "I have people in Jamaica, even if you don't." Another part is appearance. Pineapples look royal. They've got that crown of leaves, that golden armor of skin. In a society obsessed with visual cues of class, this fruit has the look. You can't fake it with an apple. Still, pineapples remain so rare that most people never actually taste one. If you're lower class, you might catch a whiff at a market stall if you're lucky. But more likely, you see them in paintings, on wallpaper, or maybe molded into butter at a high society table. You attend one such dinner, nervous, overdressed, stomach rumbling. The table is long, crowded with foods you don't recognize. And right in the middle, one pineapple, perched like a trophy. No one touches it. No one dares to cut into it. Sits there uneaten as a symbol. And here's a quirky tidbit. Pineapples weren't just decor, they were a whole economy. People hired out their pineapples to friends. A rented fruit might appear at 3 or 4 dinner parties before being eaten, or collapsing in a fermented heap backstage, like a diva. There were pineapple brokers, pineapple dealers, pineapple drama. It's no surprise that writers of the time found all this mildly ridiculous. Satirists loved mocking the pineapple craze. They'd sketch caricatures of lords and ladies bowing to fruit, or stage plays where the pineapple is stolen, lost, or fought over. Even then, people sensed that the pineapple was both majestic and, frankly, kind of silly. Still, the obsession grew. And as you'll see soon, so did England's determination to grow their own. You've just left a London dinner party where a pineapple was the uncut star of the show, and your curiosity is piqued. How on earth do people even get a pineapple in England without chartering a whole ship to Jamaica? Simple answer, they build a pineapple palace. Okay, not literally a palace, but close. As you trudge through the damp, gray countryside outside of Bath, you notice a strange building behind a sprawling estate. It's not a barn, and it's certainly not a chapel. The glass glints faintly under the overcast sky, and the brick walls are thick, far too sturdy for any average greenhouse. This is a pinery, a purpose-built, heat-trapping shrine dedicated entirely to growing tropical fruit in the middle of a very soggy island. Growing pineapples in England is, frankly, ridiculous. The climate is all wrong. You know this. Everyone knows this. And yet, driven by pride and pineapple envy, English elites decide to engineer their way into success. Inside the pinery, the air is damp, heavy, and somewhat amazingly warm. That's thanks to a network of flues and stoves running under the floor and behind the walls. Coal fires are constantly tended to keep the temperature around a balmy 85 degrees Fahrenheit. There's also a complicated glass setup to maximize sunlight, even on the cloudiest of English days. As you walk past rows of baby pineapples called slips and suckers, you learn that the process takes 2 to 3 years per fruit. Imagine tending to a single plant for 3 birthdays, only to end up with 1 edible pineapple. It's the kind of horticultural patience you only have if you're already wealthy and bored. Historians still argue whether the very first successful pineapple grown in England happened at Dorneycourt or at the Royal Gardens in Chelsea. The most famous, though, is John Rose's pineapple, presented to King Charles II in the late 1600s. A painting of that moment. Rose, bowing with the fruit. Charles, gazing upon it like a newborn baby, became iconic. You might have seen it without realizing its full absurdity. What's especially funny is that the pineapple in the painting was almost certainly not grown entirely in England. Most likely it was imported partway and ripened in the greenhouse, a bit of horticultural theater. But no one cared. It was about the idea of it. And so begins the golden age of the pineapple pinery. Estate owners compete not only to grow the biggest fruit, but to build the most elaborate structures to do so. You tour one garden where the pinery has ornate Gothic arches. Another has Corinthian columns. One, owned by a particularly flamboyant nobleman, features a fake waterfall. It's unclear whether the pineapples appreciated the ambience. The labor involved is immense. Gardeners wake at dawn to stoke the fires, manage the airflow, trim the leaves, and pollinate by hand using tiny brushes. You meet one named Thomas, who proudly says he's only lost 3 pineapples in 15 years. You congratulate him like he's a surgeon. You wonder, was it all worth it? Well, if status is the game, yes. Having homegrown pineapples is like having a Bentley that runs on crushed sapphires. You don't need it, but once you have it, everyone knows. There's also an emerging science vibe to it. The Enlightenment is in full swing, and agriculture is the new frontier of gentlemanly experimentation. Growing pineapples becomes an academic pursuit. Landowners write long letters to one another, debating soil acidity and insulation techniques. They hold fruit-tasting parties and produce detailed diagrams of their greenhouses. It's botany with a touch of egomania. At one estate, you witness an actual competition. Two gardeners facing off in a grow-off. Their employers watch nervously from the sidelines, sipping sherry. The prize? A gold-handled pruning knife and lifelong bragging rights. But it wasn't always glamorous. A quirky little tidbit. Some pineries doubled as covert love nests. Since they were warm, isolated, and rarely inspected by the household staff, the occasional tryst was known to happen among the fruit. There are even old servant gossip journals hinting at such scandals. Lady E was seen emerging from the lower glass house in a state of undue dishevelment. Pineapple scandal indeed. Despite their grandeur, pineries were fragile. One cold delivery missed, and the plants could freeze overnight. A cold snap, a broken pane, even a distracted gardener, could mean disaster. That made successful crops all the more precious. You see it in the way aristocrats handle their harvest. Like they've been given the crown jewels. And sometimes they really put their pineapples on pedestals. Literally. You come across a garden with stone pillars, each topped with a stone-carved pineapple. These weren't just garden flourishes, they were full-on architectural declarations. The Dunmore pineapple in Scotland, for instance, still stands today. An actual building with a giant stone pineapple dome. It looks like a prank, but it's deadly serious. Pineapples, you realize, were never just fruit in this world. They were architecture, conversation starters, marriage proposals, bribes, and sometimes, if someone was feeling particularly wild, dinner. But more on that later. You step back from the glowing warmth of the pinery, your cheeks still flushed from the tropical humidity. As you trudge up the gravel path toward the main house, something curious happens. A footman opens the door for you, and he's wearing a waistcoat embroidered with tiny pineapples. Not just one or two. Dozens, stitched in gold thread like a botanical coat of arms. You're beginning to see the full picture. The pineapple isn't just grown. It's performed. Inside, the drawing room is filled with chatter. Someone is gossiping about the Duchess of Argyll's latest party. Did you hear? They whisper. She had 2 pineapples. One to show, and one to slice. A ripple of gasps, followed by polite outrage. That's vulgar, says one guest. She might as well have burned money. Displaying a pineapple, you're quickly learning, is a bold statement. In 18th century England, it's the equivalent of casually parking a gilded carriage in your foyer. Not to ride it, just to let people know you could. And if you don't happen to have one of your own, you improvise. As you wander the house, you find pineapples on porcelain teacups, pineapples carved into the banisters, pineapples sculpted into the butter served at breakfast. There's even a heavy curtain tieback shaped like a pineapple, slightly too large, clearly made by someone who's never actually seen one. You begin to understand. The pineapple is a status object. Not because of what it is, but what it suggests. That you have the resources to import the rare. That you are worldly, sophisticated, possibly even connected to the West Indies trade. The fruit becomes shorthand for empire, even if you've never left Wiltshire. In some elite homes, pineapples are passed down like heirlooms. Not as actual fruit, of course, but as crystal or wax replicas. One particularly over-the-top aristocrat you hear about kept a ceramic pineapple under a bell jar in his study, dusted weekly by his valet. He claimed it reminded him of the sunlit shores of Barbuda, though he'd never been east of Dover. Historians still debate whether the average person believed the pineapple hype or merely tolerated it. There are letters and diaries from the period that suggest both admiration and eye-rolling. One London merchant wrote in 1752, "Sir Ralph has acquired a pineapple and insists it dine with us nightly. The tone? Dry as toast. Still, the cultural meaning of the pineapple expands. You attend a dinner where the hostess has ordered a cake, an elaborate, multi-tiered confection, frosted with pineapple-shaped sugar sculptures, is brought out with fanfare. No one eats it. That's not the point. The point is that it exists. It might as well be a Faberge egg." At another estate, you tour the dining room and spot a silver cloche shaped like, you guessed it, a pineapple. The servant lifts it, and underneath is not fruit but boiled turnips. Still, the symbolism remains. And yes, pineapples start appearing in portraits. You stop before a large oil painting. A young woman in a powdered wig, seated on a terrace. In her lap, nestled in fine lace, rests a single pineapple. She holds it with the delicacy of someone cradling a kitten, or possibly a small, adorable grenade. The fruit gleams. Her expression? Mild triumph. You see this trend repeated across English portraiture of the period. Pineapples become visual shorthand for luxury, a kind of edible Rolex. They didn't need to be realistic. In fact, many artists had clearly never seen one. Some look like artichokes. Some look like pine cones on steroids. But the intent was clear. One particularly awkward portrait shows a baron standing proudly beside a table of fruit, a pineapple balanced precariously on top. According to the family lore, it was actually a borrowed pineapple, returned to its owner after the sitting. Imagine posing with someone else's fruit for 3 hours while trying to look casually imperial. This pineapple propaganda worked. Foreign visitors to England remarked on it often. A visiting French diplomat in 1778 wrote, "It is most curious. These Englishmen are mad for a spiky fruit they cannot pronounce and seldom eat." He then drew a tiny sketch of one in his journal, labeling it Le Fruit du Snobism. What's especially telling is how the obsession trickled down. By the late 1700s, even those outside the aristocracy began trying to mimic pineapple grandeur. You walk past a middle-class home in a new suburb, and there, perched on the gateposts, cast-iron pineapples. Not edible, not fragrant, but very much trying their best. In fact, the pineapple begins to appear in public architecture. Inns are named the Golden Pineapple. Pub signs adopt the image. Carpenters carve them into bed frames, believing they bring luck or perhaps just lend an air of cultivated extravagance. One town even commissions a pineapple-shaped fountain. It breaks constantly. Here's a quirky aside. Pineapples briefly become a fashion motif. You pass a lady wearing a hat trimmed with pineapple-shaped baubles. A gentleman's waistcoat embroidered with gold fruit. There's even a popular walking cane with a pineapple-shaped knob, impractical, heavy, and frequently stolen. Back in the drawing room, your host now gestures proudly toward a glass dome in the corner. Inside, on a velvet pedestal, is this evening's pineapple. He offers you a glass of sherry and says with theatrical restraint, "We may cut it, if the company feels deserving." The room holds its breath. They don't cut it. Of course they don't. You leave the drawing room with a chuckle, still amused by the dramatic reverence shown to a single piece of fruit. But tonight's not over. You're heading to yet another grand home, this one even more ostentatious. There's a party underway, and you've heard whispers of something unusual. As you approach the front steps, a doorman in powdered wig and silk stockings leans in and murmurs, "We've got a rental tonight." His eyes twinkle, like he's letting you in on a delicious scandal. Inside, the ballroom shimmers with candlelight, powdered guests, and powdered wigs. A string quartet plays something polite and forgettable. And there, displayed on a mirrored pedestal like a holy relic, sits the evening's real guest of honor, a rented pineapple. Yes, you heard that right. By the mid-1700s, pineapple fever had reached such absurd heights that renting a pineapple became a legitimate business. If you couldn't afford to grow one, and importing was too dear, you simply borrowed one. For a fee, of course. You saunter closer to inspect the fruit. It's surprisingly small, more squash than sculpture, but undeniably regal. A clerk stands nearby, tasked with preventing curious fingers from testing its ripeness. You hear him mutter, "It's on its third engagement this week." You back away, suddenly wary of fruit fatigue. This wasn't unusual. Pineapples might attend 4 or 5 gatherings before they began to wither or, heaven forbid, rot. Guests were never supposed to touch or eat them. That would have been like taking a bite out of someone's chandelier. Instead, you admired from a distance, perhaps even gossiped about its previous appearances. I believe Lady Pemberton had this one last Tuesday. There's something deliciously theatrical about it all. A fruit making social rounds like a minor celebrity. You imagine a small coach, velvet-lined, delivering the pineapple from one soiree to another, its leaves bobbing with dignified boredom. Historians still argue whether these pineapples had specific caretakers or even contracts, but anecdotal evidence suggests some were tracked, scheduled, and occasionally double-booked. And yes, people were caught trying to eat them. At one particularly infamous party in Norwich, a tipsy baronet allegedly carved into a rented pineapple, not realizing it was borrowed. A footman reportedly fainted. The host had to pay an enormous penalty, and the fruit, it was said, died in vain. A local pamphlet later described it as a tragedy, rivaling that of poor Yorick. You slip into a quiet alcove and overhear a pair of elderly women reminiscing about a dinner party from years past. He brought a pineapple and a pomegranate. One says with a wheeze of disbelief, "The excess of it. I thought he was going to propose." Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some rentals came with accessories. A polished silver tray, a velvet cushion. One particularly dedicated lender included a satin-covered stand and a brass plaque that read, "Not for consumption." And believe it or not, a few enterprising vendors began offering false pineapples for rent, wax replicas so convincing. Most guests couldn't tell the difference in candlelight. You pass one now in the hallway, and it's flawless. The shine, the color, the precise curl of each leaf. Of course, if anyone did try to slice it, the ruse was up. But really, who was going to risk social death by wielding a knife at a centerpiece? Some hosts took the deception further. They display the real pineapple but serve pineapple-infused dishes secretly made with apple and vinegar. A trick of flavor and suggestion. The illusion was everything. Authenticity? Optional. The pineapple rental phenomenon also trickled into lower social circles. You overhear a merchant's wife bragging at the punch bowl. "We had one for our daughter's wedding. It cost a week's wages, but worth it." You glance at her expression and realize she's not joking. The fruit's aura is intoxicating. In marketplaces, you even spot handwritten advertisements. Finest West Indian pineapple, handsome size, well-preserved, available for display. No cutting permitted. 5 guineas per night. Inquire at Mr. Cuthbert's, Pudding Lane. There's something both admirable and absurd in all this. A single fruit causing a ripple across society, from high-born nobles to clever merchants to ambitious newlyweds. You can't help but admire the commitment. But then again, England in this era was all about appearances. From powdered wigs to wallpaper imitating marble, from artificial flowers to painted-on beauty marks, illusion was half the point. The pineapple was just a particularly spiky version of the same game. You imagine yourself hosting a modest gathering back in 1755. You've rented a pineapple for the night. It sits on your sideboard, candles framing it just right. Guests arrive, admire it, gasp appropriately. You pour wine. You nod smugly. And at the end of the evening, the pineapple is gently wrapped and returned, never having been touched, except perhaps in the hearts of your deeply impressed friends. Strange? Definitely. But in a world where reputation could rise or fall on the curve of a table leg or the cut of a waistcoat, a rented pineapple made perfect sense. And as the quartet swells in the background and another guest bends reverently toward the fruit, careful not to breathe too close, you realize you're in the middle of a kind of fruity theater, one where the curtain never quite falls, and the star doesn't even speak. The next morning, you're back on your feet and slightly amused. Last night's rented pineapple is already a fond memory and a running joke in your mind. But your curiosity pulls you in another direction. This time, not to a party, but to an artist's studio. Because you've heard of something even more delightfully odd. Portraiture featuring pineapples. You step into the cramped, paint-splattered studio of one Mr. Langford, a London portraitist known for his flattering brushwork and fashionable fruit flourishes. His current commission, a noblewoman's likeness with a pineapple. "I've done for this month," he mutters, mixing ochre into a buttery yellow. Everyone wants to be seen with one these days. It's all very symbolic. He says that last word with a sigh, as if symbolism has become terribly tiresome. You step around the canvas to peek, and there she is, Lady Hawthorne, seated in velvet, a serene smile on her powdered face, one elbow resting on a marble pedestal. And on that pedestal, pineapple, of course. It gleams under an imagined beam of tropical sunlight, painted with almost devotional precision. "I had to rent one for the sitting," Langford adds. She insisted on a real one, but the poor thing had turned slightly soft by the second day. "We just painted it firmer." Historians still argue whether subjects actually owned the pineapples they posed with, or whether many simply borrowed one for the afternoon and paid extra for the illusion of opulence. But one thing is clear: the pineapple wasn't an edible afterthought. It was a co-star. In fact, portraits with pineapples became so common among the nobility that they created a subtle visual code. An upward gaze toward the fruit suggested ambition. A casual lean suggested ownership. A gentle hand resting upon its crown suggested domination. Not of the pineapple, mind you, but of the colonial system that brought it here. You start noticing the trend everywhere. In one gallery, you spot a naval officer pointing proudly at a pineapple with his sword. In another, a wealthy widow is surrounded by floral motifs, with a solitary pineapple nestled among them like a sly wink. And then there's a particularly famous piece: the portrait of Captain Philip Herbert, his hand resting dramatically on a pineapple set on a stack of books. The pose says, "I am worldly, I read things, and I also have access to rare Caribbean produce." Subtle like a cannonball. Even the monarchy joins in. You're told of a painting, now lost but once famous, where Queen Charlotte appears beside an overflowing table of fruit, with the pineapple front and center. Whether she ever ate one is irrelevant. It was the message that mattered. Here's a quirky side note. Some artists, having never seen an actual pineapple, painted them completely wrong. There's one 1760s portrait in a country manor where the pineapple looks suspiciously like a fat pine cone covered in honey. You chuckle. Close enough. The fruit even makes its way into family crests. One Scottish noble house added a pineapple to their coat of arms after successfully growing one in Perthshire, though, to be fair, it took 6 years and 4 gardeners to do so. Still, the motto beneath was changed to Fortitudine et fructus. With fortitude and fruit. You can't make this stuff up. You start to see pineapples where you least expect them. On the spines of books in libraries. On fireplace mantels. In tapestries. One tapestry you pass in a great hall tells the biblical story of Eve offering Adam not an apple, but a pineapple. Bold reinterpretation. As you walk the manicured hallways of the estate, your guide, a cheerful but clearly pineapple-fatigued butler, tells you about the ladies' pineapple room. The walls are covered in tropical murals. The wallpaper is dotted with faint pineapple outlines. Even the doorknobs are pineapple-shaped. She once considered having a pineapple-shaped bath, he says, but the carpenter resigned. You begin to understand that for many aristocrats, the pineapple became a kind of obsession. Not just a trend, but a lifestyle, a theme, and not just for humans. In one utterly bizarre portrait you pass, a family dog poses next to a pineapple on a velvet cushion. No explanation, no context, just a terrier and a fruit frozen together in time. But here's where things get even more surreal. Some people began commissioning pineapple portraits without themselves in them. That's right, just the fruit. Centered, dramatic, lovingly painted, like a royal baby announcement. These pineapple portraits were often hung in entrance halls, where guests would see them first. The implication was clear. This household has attained the highest mark of civilization. We have grown, or at least briefly owned, this. You stop before one of these pineapple-only canvases and stare. It's oddly powerful. The shading is exquisite. The background, a gentle blend of pale blue and ivory. The fruit, proud and plump, gazes out over its domain like a monarch surveying its kingdom. What does it all mean? What does it say about 18th century England that a fruit could demand its own oil painting? Perhaps it speaks to the hunger for identity in a rapidly changing world. Or perhaps it's just what happens when wealth, colonial power, and a sharp-looking tropical plant collide in a society already obsessed with rank and display. Either way, you can't deny one thing: it worked. The pineapple, in brushstrokes and symbolism, cemented its place in visual history. And now, centuries later, here you are, still staring at it. You've wandered through galleries and great halls filled with painted pineapples, and now you find yourself outside again, following the scent of warm earth and the sharp sweetness of composting vegetation. You're heading not toward another drawing room or studio, but toward the real stars behind the scenes, the gardeners. Because while nobles posed and boasted, it was the gardeners who actually made pineapples grow in a country where they had no business existing. You arrive at a grand estate. Vast lawns, clipped hedges, fountains shaped like dolphins. But beyond the fancy facade is the kitchen garden, the quieter, earthier heart of the operation. It's early morning. Mist curls around the glass frames of the hothouses, and you hear the low murmur of fire being stoked beneath the brickwork. You step inside and are met with tropical heat and the rich smell of damp soil. There's a man here with soot on his cheek and a tiny pineapple in his gloved hand. Meet Mr. Joseph Carter, master gardener to the Marquis of Stanwell, and proud cultivator of 6 pineapples this year. 6 good ones, he says, brushing his palm across the waxy leaves like they're prize-winning terriers. 2 for show, 4 for pudding. He grins at his joke. You like him immediately. Carter walks you through the careful process, step by meticulous step. It begins with suckers, baby plants clipped from mature pineapples, carefully packed and shipped from Jamaica or Barbados. If they survive the voyage, many don't. They're planted in raised beds, nestled in layers of compost, brick, and manure. Then come the months, years really, of coddling, temperature checks, soil aeration, constant monitoring for fungus, pests, or sudden frost. Historians still debate whether gardeners like Carter were considered high-ranking servants or just very useful ones. In practice, a successful pinery could elevate a gardener's status dramatically. Some were paid bonuses for each fruit harvested. Others were given free rein to design entire greenhouse systems. A few even published treatises on their methods, like Thomas Hitt's treatise of fruit gardening, where he solemnly discusses pineapple growing like a gentleman describing military tactics. Carter shows you the flue system, ingenious brick tunnels that run hot air beneath the beds, regulating the warmth like an underfloor heating system for fruit. Keeps them comfortable, he says with mock seriousness. No one wants a shivering pineapple. Here's a fun tidbit. Some estates employed pineapple watchers, junior gardeners tasked solely with making sure no one stole, touched, or breathed too heavily on the fruit. One wrote in a journal, Miss Claridge leaned too near the number 3 fruit. I advised her sharply. You can imagine how competitive things got. If Lord Pembroke's gardener produced a pineapple in February, Lady Ellsworth's man would be expected to beat him by a week next year. There were rivalries, feuds, even accusations of sabotage. In one 1740 letter, a gardener claims his rival snuck into his pinery at night and whistled unkindly at the plants, an act he believed caused a crop failure. Science? Maybe not. Suspicion? Oh, absolutely. You follow Carter to the seedling bench, where tiny plants sprout under protective glass. They're finicky, he says. Too much heat and they sulk. Not enough and they die of spite. You begin to suspect pineapples are just dramatic little divas wrapped in armor. Still, Carter speaks of them with affection. Each fruit is hand-pollinated with a soft brush. Each leaf cleaned of dust. Each one tagged, measured, and charted. He opens a logbook to show you a page filled with careful script. Pine number 3, flowered early. Sweet scent, perhaps ready by Michaelmas. Avoid draft near west wall. You turn the pages and spot entries going back 10 years. Some pineapples are named Henry, Duchess, the notorious one. You raise an eyebrow. Carter shrugs. When you've been waiting 30 months for something to grow, you start getting attached. Historians still puzzle over the labor dynamics of pineapple growing. Some argue it was an example of Enlightenment-era experimentation, noble patrons sponsoring scientific agriculture. Others point out the more uncomfortable truth. The success of English-grown pineapples relied on knowledge, techniques, and plant material imported from colonial territories, particularly the Caribbean. That knowledge didn't just float across the sea. It came from enslaved and indentured workers, from indigenous agricultural practices, from local experts whose names we'll never know. The English refined it, wrote it down, and made it fashionable. But the roots of every greenhouse-grown pineapple trace far beyond Surrey's flowerbeds. Carter pauses to water a plant, then leans against the doorframe. "It's strange," he says. "You grow something for years, watch it finally bloom. Then they display it for one night, don't even eat it." He shakes his head. "Pineapple gets more attention than I ever will." And yet, you get the sense he's proud. Not just of the fruit, but of the challenge. Growing a pineapple in England was like building a ship in a bathtub. It made no sense, and that's precisely why it mattered. Before you leave, he offers you a small cutting. Won't grow, but it's pretty. You tuck it into your coat pocket, already imagining it on your windowsill. As you step back out into the cool morning air, your breath fogs and your shoes crunch on gravel. The pineapple stays behind, snug in its artificial tropics. And the gardener, as always, stays mostly invisible. Just a name in a dusty ledger. A soot-smudged hand in the background of history's fruitiest trend. After your whirlwind tour of pineapple feasts, pineapple forks, and pineapple fanfare, you might think the British obsession couldn't possibly get any more, well, pine-apply. But you'd be wrong. Because just when you thought it was about exotic taste and ostentatious display, you stumble into something even stranger, pineapple-themed architecture. You begin this next leg of your journey in Scotland. Specifically, in a perfectly respectable patch of countryside where something deeply peculiar is rising above the trees. At first glance, you assume it's a folly, one of those odd little decorative towers that 18th-century aristocrats loved to plop into their gardens. But as you approach, squinting through the mist, you realize what you're looking at. A giant stone pineapple. No, really. It's the Dunmore pineapple, a 2-story building topped with an intricately carved, 20-foot-tall pineapple dome. The details are exquisite. Leafy crown curling outward, textured rind etched in painstaking stonework. It's a marvel of symmetry and slightly deranged creativity. You stand there, speechless. A sheep passes you, unimpressed. The building was commissioned around 1761 by John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, who had just returned from serving as governor of Virginia and, perhaps, fallen headlong into pineapple fever. Historians still argue whether the pineapple was meant as a literal celebration of his return, or as a symbol of colonial reach, hospitality, or simply personal whimsy. Whatever the reason, the result is magnificent, and also completely bonkers. Here's a quirky aside. The pineapple isn't just decorative. The building beneath it was used as a hothouse and garden retreat. Some say it stored pineapples grown on the estate. Others believe it was just an eccentric summer house where the Earl drank tea and marveled at his own architectural punchline. But Dunmore wasn't alone in his fruity enthusiasm. You begin spotting pineapple motifs everywhere. Gateposts in Bath topped with pineapple finials. Iron railings in Liverpool with pineapple knobs. Hotel facades, theater prosceniums, and even chimney caps sculpted to resemble the royal fruit. In the design world of Georgian Britain, if it didn't have a pineapple, it might as well have been blank. One elegant townhome in Soho sports pineapples carved into the lintels above every window. You ask the doorman why. He shrugs. Might have been a grocer once. Or just someone with too much masonry money. It wasn't just exterior decoration either. Inside the homes of the wealthy, you find wallpaper patterns featuring pineapples in repeating rows. Elegant, stylized, and often gilded. Furniture makers in London begin offering pineapple leg chairs, their front legs carved to resemble the fruit's texture, though it does make sitting a bit of a wobbly affair. One cabinet maker you visit in York proudly shows off a pineapple escritoire, a writing desk shaped like half a peeled pineapple, complete with little drawers tucked into the rind. Not terribly practical, he admits. But look at it. Look at it. In stately homes, pineapples adorn plaster ceilings, mahogany banisters, even chandeliers. You tour one dining room where every fork bears a pineapple engraving. In another, the entire fireplace around is sculpted with tropical fruits, though the pineapple always sits in the center, like a fruity monarch surrounded by lesser berries. Historians still debate whether this explosion of pineapple iconography stemmed from genuine admiration or rampant one-upmanship. But one thing's certain. Once the pineapple became a symbol of hospitality and wealth, it was everywhere, a pine-applied arms race of taste and subtle social bragging. The symbolism spreads beyond the elite. 2. By the end of the century, even modest townhouses begin to include pineapple decorations. Cast iron where marble once stood, painted plaster instead of carved wood. It's democratized decadence. Everyone wants a bit of the pineapple dream. In the colonies, especially the Caribbean, the irony deepens. While pineapples are grown in places like Jamaica, Barbados, and Antigua, it's the English estates that obsessively frame them in architecture. You walk through a plantation manager's home in Barbados and find no pineapple motifs at all. Only practical porches, cane screens, and wide shutters. The pineapple is, after all, ordinary there. Abundant. Delicious, yes, but no more sacred than a yam. Back in England, though, things get more theatrical. You read about the Earl of Sandwich? Yes, that Sandwich, who reportedly designed a dinner pavilion shaped like a pineapple. Whether it was ever completed remains uncertain, but the plan survives. A hexagonal dining chamber, topped with a leafy dome and lined with tropical murals. One footman was to wear pineapple-colored livery. Another, pineapple perfume. And then there's the traveling Pineapple Theatre in London. A short-lived but utterly sincere attempt to host tropical-themed plays inside a pineapple-shaped tent. The productions were mostly romantic farces. One play, titled The Fruit of His Labors, featured a young botanist who wins love and fortune by growing a pineapple on Hampstead Heath. The play bombed, but the costumes were widely praised. You can't help but laugh as you trace your fingers over a marble banister in one townhouse, its top ending in a perfectly carved pineapple finial. What started as a rare fruit has now transformed into architectural aspiration. A fruit on a fork, then a fruit on a flagpole. But perhaps the most telling moment comes when you visit a town hall in Sussex, rebuilt in the 1790s after a fire. Atop the clock tower, rising above the weather vane, someone had placed, what else? A 5-foot-tall pineapple spire. It has no time-telling function, no architectural logic. It's just there, watching over the town, proud, pointy. You stand in the square and look up at it, half expecting it to wink at you. And somehow that feels right. After your whirlwind tour of pineapple feasts, pineapple forks, and pineapple fanfare, you might think the British obsession couldn't possibly get any more, well, pineapple. But you'd be wrong. Because just when you thought it was about exotic taste and ostentatious display, you stumble into something even stranger, pineapple-themed architecture. You begin this next leg of your journey in Scotland. Specifically, in a perfectly respectable patch of countryside where something deeply peculiar is rising above the trees. At first glance, you assume it's a folly, one of those odd little decorative towers that 18th-century aristocrats loved to plop into their gardens. But as you approach, squinting through the mist, you realize what you're looking at. A giant stone pineapple. No, really, it's the Dunmore Pineapple, a 2-story building topped with an intricately carved, 20-foot-tall pineapple dome. The details are exquisite. Leafy crown curling outward, textured rind etched in painstaking stonework. It's a marvel of symmetry and slightly deranged creativity. You stand there, speechless. A sheep passes you, unimpressed. The building was commissioned around 1761 by John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, who had just returned from serving as governor of Virginia and, perhaps, fallen headlong into pineapple fever. Historians still argue whether the pineapple was meant as a literal celebration of his return, or as a symbol of colonial reach, hospitality, or simply personal whimsy. Whatever the reason, the result is magnificent, and also completely bonkers. Here's a quirky aside. The pineapple isn't just decorative. The building beneath it was used as a hothouse and garden retreat. Some say it stored pineapples grown on the estate. Others believe it was just an eccentric summer house where the Earl drank tea and marveled at his own architectural punchline. But Dunmore wasn't alone in his fruity enthusiasm. You begin spotting pineapple motifs everywhere. Gateposts in Bath topped with pineapple finials. Iron railings in Liverpool with pineapple knobs. Hotel facades, theatre prosceniums, and even chimney caps sculpted to resemble the royal fruit. In the design world of Georgian Britain, if it didn't have a pineapple, it might as well have been blank. One elegant townhome in Soho sports pineapples carved into the lintels above every window. You ask the doorman why. He shrugs. Might have been a grocer once. Or just someone with too much masonry money. It wasn't just exterior decoration either. Inside the homes of the wealthy, you find wallpaper patterns featuring pineapples in repeating rows. Elegant, stylized, and often gilded. Furniture makers in London begin offering pineapple leg chairs, their front legs carved to resemble the fruit's texture, though it does make sitting a bit of a wobbly affair. One cabinet maker you visit in York proudly shows off a pineapple escritoire, a writing desk shaped like half a peeled pineapple, complete with little drawers tucked into the rind. Not terribly practical, he admits. But look at it. Look at it. In stately homes, pineapples adorn plaster ceilings, mahogany banisters, even chandeliers. You tour one dining room where every fork bears a pineapple engraving. In another, the entire fireplace around is sculpted with tropical fruits, though the pineapple always sits in the center, like a fruity monarch surrounded by lesser berries. Historians still debate whether this explosion of pineapple iconography stemmed from genuine admiration or rampant one-upmanship. But one thing's certain. Once the pineapple became a symbol of hospitality and wealth, it was everywhere. A pine-applied arms race of taste and subtle social bragging. The symbolism spreads beyond the elite, too. By the end of the century, even modest townhouses begin to include pineapple decorations. Cast iron where marble once stood, painted plaster instead of carved wood. It's democratized decadence. Everyone wants a bit of the pineapple dream. In the colonies, especially the Caribbean, the irony deepens. While pineapples are grown in places like Jamaica, Barbados, and Antigua, it's the English estates that obsessively frame them in architecture. You walk through a plantation manager's home in Barbados and find no pineapple motifs at all. Only practical porches, cane screens, and wide shutters. The pineapple is, after all, ordinary there. Abundant. Delicious, yes, but no more sacred than a yam. Back in England, though, things get more theatrical. You read about the Earl of Sandwich? Yes, that Sandwich, who reportedly designed a dinner pavilion shaped like a pineapple. Whether it was ever completed remains uncertain, but the plan survives. A hexagonal dining chamber, topped with a leafy dome and lined with tropical murals. One footman was to wear pineapple-colored livery, another, pineapple perfume. And then there's the traveling Pineapple Theatre in London. A short-lived but utterly sincere attempt to host tropical-themed plays inside a pineapple-shaped tent. The productions were mostly romantic farces. One play, titled The Fruit of His Labors, featured a young botanist who wins love and fortune by growing a pineapple on Hampstead Heath. The play bombed, but the costumes were widely praised. You can't help but laugh as you trace your fingers over a marble banister in one townhouse, its top ending in a perfectly carved pineapple finial. What started as a rare fruit has now transformed into architectural aspiration. A fruit on a fork, then a fruit on a flagpole. But perhaps the most telling moment comes when you visit a town hall in Sussex, rebuilt in the 1790s after a fire. Atop the clock tower, rising above the weather vane, someone had placed, what else? A 5-foot-tall pineapple spire. It has no time-telling function, no architectural logic. It's just there, watching over the town, proud, pointy. You stand in the square and look up at it, half expecting it to wink at you. And somehow that feels right. You've seen pineapples on plates, in portraits, and perched atop architectural marvels. But now, as you stroll along a quiet lane just outside Oxford, you come across something even more curious. A small, ivy-draped shop with a swinging wooden sign that reads simply, The Pineapple Society. You're not dreaming. You push open the door, and the smell of old books and citrus greets you. Inside, 2 men in powdered wigs are sipping tea beside a fireplace carved, of course, with pineapples. One of them looks up and smiles. Here for the pamphlets? Apparently, you've stumbled upon one of many pineapple appreciation societies that popped up across England in the latter half of the 18th century. These were part social clubs, part agricultural circles, and part, well, let's call it fruit-based fandom. You take a seat and leaf through a stack of printed materials. There's Pineapple Quarterly, a slim volume filled with growing tips, pineapple-themed poetry, and reviews of recent pineapple sightings at society events. A particularly glowing column praises Lord Westbury's flawless, lemon-sized specimen, boasting symmetry and a regal curl. Historians still argue, says one of the tea drinkers, whether these societies were serious horticultural groups or elaborate social jokes. He sips his tea. We believe they were both, and they were serious about their rules. You glance at a printed charter from the Royal Anonymous Guild, headquartered briefly in Bath. It declares that all members must attest to the cultivation, acquisition, or justifiable admiration of at least one pineapple per annum. Meetings began with a ceremonial slicing, though rarely of actual fruit. Here's a quirky detail. Several of these clubs issued pineapple pins, tiny gold badges worn discreetly on lapels to signal membership. One rare example sits under glass in the shop. It's delicate, with 3 tiny emeralds at the base to represent the roots of empire. You resist the urge to ask if they sell replicas. Some societies had more theatrical traditions. The Ananophiles of Kent, yes, that's what they called themselves, met under candlelight, read aloud from pineapple-centric travel journals, and held annual toasts using hollowed-out wax pineapples filled with spiced punch. One surviving menu includes pineapple syllabub, pineapple-flavored air biscuits, and pineapple-shaped blancmange, non-pineapple. You're shown a logbook from 1773 where members debated the ethics of pineapple fakery. Should wax fruit be allowed at meetings? Did it count if the pineapple was gifted rather than earned? One fiercely worded entry insists, to own a pineapple without love is to commit fruit treason. These societies weren't limited to gentlemen, either. By the 1780s, several ladies' pineapple clubs emerged, especially in spa towns like Tunbridge Wells and Harrogate. The Sisterhood of Anonymous, as one group called itself, combined pineapple-themed sewing circles with charitable events. Their motto, to sweetness and status, ever climbing. A faded broadsheet on the wall announces a pineapple ball held in 1788. Guests were encouraged to dress in tropical finery, with one woman reportedly arriving in a gown stitched entirely with pineapple-patterned lace. Another guest came in what was described as a pleasing yellow plume, but was later revealed to be dried pineapple leaves dipped in wax. You find a dusty guidebook clearly produced for members, titled On the Proper Observation of Pineapples in the Home. It includes advice like, position fruit near a window for optimum admiration. Do not place near onions, lest its scent be compromised. Avoid small dogs around the display, for reasons left politely unstated. There's a passage on pineapple etiquette, too, how to compliment a host's pineapple without appearing greedy. One must never ask, may I try it? But rather, what a noble fruit, surely too grand to be eaten. The shopkeeper chuckles. We once had a reenactment here. Everyone brought a pineapple, real or not. We judged them for character, posture, and scent. One was disqualified for having been seen at a rival's breakfast. You raise an eyebrow. Was it rented? Of course it was. We all knew. But these societies weren't just about parties and pamphlets. They also helped popularize the pineapple as a symbol of hospitality. Many would place a carving or emblem outside their meeting halls, signaling that all were welcome, as long as they appreciated the fruit naturally. The pineapple motif soon appeared in hotels, inns, and even taverns. You pass a ledger listing dozens of establishments. The golden pineapple, the welcome fruit, the traveler's anonymous. It became a shorthand across Britain. You're safe here. Come inside. We probably won't serve actual pineapple, but we know you're impressed. This idea even traveled abroad. American colonial buildings began to feature pineapples above their doors, a quiet homage to British trends, though over time, the pineapple in the colonies took on new meanings, linked to abundance and neighborly warmth rather than status. Back in the shop, the club members are now chuckling over a satirical cartoon from the Gentleman's Magazine. It shows a man proposing marriage while kneeling before, not his beloved, but a large pineapple on a pedestal. The caption reads, "Only one of you can accompany me to Bath this season." They laugh softly, then fall into a comfortable silence. You take one last look around the Pineapple Society shop, at the wax fruit, the miniature portraits, the poetry scrolls. It's easy to scoff, but it's also kind of beautiful. An entire network of people finding joy, absurdity, and identity in a single strange fruit. You thank the shopkeeper, step back into the sunlight, and head down the cobbled path. As you walk away, you realize you've started to feel it too, that tiny flicker of admiration when you see a pineapple motif. Not because it's practical, not because it's useful, but because it means something, even if no one can quite agree what. You've drunk from pineapple-shaped punch bowls, studied pineapple etiquette, and stood in the shadow of a 20-foot stone fruit. But now you begin to wonder, what happened next? Because surely, no fruit can stay fashionable forever. You follow the thread into the 19th century, a quieter era in the pineapple story, but a revealing one. The glamour has begun to dim. The pineapple, once the shining jewel of aristocratic tables and architectural follies, is starting to look, well, common. It begins, as most downfalls do, with technology. Thanks to advances in greenhouse heating, better glass production, and more widespread gardening manuals, growing pineapples becomes dramatically easier. Not easy, mind you, pineapples remain high maintenance but manageable. Middle-class estate owners, ambitious clergymen, and even some schools start experimenting with homegrown pineapples. You stroll through a provincial town and find a row of modest homes, each with its own lean-to greenhouse tacked onto the back like an afterthought. One has a sign, "Pineapples in season, viewing by appointment." In other words, the pineapple is going mainstream. You speak to one Mr. Lambert, a grocer's son who proudly grows a single pineapple every 3 years. "It's no longer for the dukes," he says, patting the spiny little bud. "It's for people with initiative." Historians still debate whether this democratization was a natural evolution or a slow cultural deflation. But there's no denying it. As more people gained access, the exclusivity wore off. What was once a whisper of aristocracy, "I own a pineapple," became more like, "Oh yes, we grow them too, near the cucumbers." This is especially apparent in the printed materials of the day. You find cookbooks from the 1820s featuring entire sections on pineapple pies, preserves, and jellies. No longer daring or exotic, just available. The descriptions are less flowery now, more functional. Peel, core, slice, stew. Sugar to taste. Pineapples appear as decoration in increasingly humble settings. Tea towels, biscuit tins, even chamber pots. You spot one such pot at an antiques market. Painted porcelain with a frilly pineapple motif around the rim. Somehow that feels like a turning point. And then there's the satire. You browse through a collection of early Victorian cartoons and find the pineapple now used as shorthand for diluted pretension. In one sketch, a nouveau riche family dines on tinned pineapple while posing stiffly under a wallpapered ceiling crowded with pineapple prints. The caption reads, "The fragrance of taste." You can't help but chuckle. Here's a quirky tidbit. The advent of pineapple canning in the 19th century fundamentally reshaped its image. Suddenly, you didn't need a gardener or a greenhouse, just a tin opener and a spoon. American companies, especially in Hawaii, begin exporting preserved pineapple in syrup. It arrives in Britain with colorful labels and cheerful slogans. A taste of the tropics. Without the trouble, pineapple becomes convenient, and that's not always a compliment. You stop by a small museum in Leeds where a 1904 grocery ledger sits under glass. It lists pineapple alongside everyday items like flour, tea, and lard. Once the star of the show, now just one item in the shopping list. It's a bit like finding Marie Antoinette doing the washing up. Still, not everyone lets go of the old symbolism. Some posh hotels retain their pineapple-topped gates. A few dinner clubs cling to the idea that pineapple is the mark of hospitality and refined taste, though now they serve it grilled with ham. Even Queen Victoria's household makes a point of including pineapple in garden tours, though by this time, the guides say things like, "Yes, and this was quite fashionable once, though hardly practical." And here's the irony. Just as England grows tired of its old fruit crush, the colonies ramp things up. In Hawaii, the pineapple becomes not a luxury but an industry. Plantations expand. Exports rise. Canned pineapple floods the global market, And with it, the fruit's image shifts again. From noble oddity to tropical treat. This shift ripples into advertising, too. The elegant oil paintings give way to sun-soaked posters. A bronzed hand offering a juicy slice. A smiling woman in a sarong with the tagline, "Let sunshine in, open a can." The pineapple becomes something simpler, more cheerful, less burdened by status anxiety. And so the great pendulum swings. From symbol of empire to after-dinner dessert. From elite greenhouse project to canned pantry staple. It's not a fall from grace exactly, but it's definitely a rebrand. You walk through a dusty library and find one final clue. A half-forgotten essay by a retired estate gardener, written in 1899. He reflects on the heyday of the pineapple with fondness and a hint of melancholy. There was a time when to produce a pineapple was to court fame. Now it is just fruit. Sweet, yes, but no longer storied. Still, he ends with a smile in his words. Sometimes, late in the evening, I walk the old flues and swear I can still smell it. That strange, golden perfume, like ambition, or folly, or both. You close the book gently. The pineapple may have lost its crown, but not its charm. You've watched the pineapple rise like a noble phoenix from the hothouses of Surrey and fall, gracefully, into the syrupy depths of a tin can. But now, something curious begins to happen in the early 20th century. The pineapple stages a strange kind of afterlife. It's no longer the fruit of kings, or even of middle-class garden parties. Instead, it slips into a new role, one it may never have expected. Icon of kitsch. You find yourself strolling down a boardwalk in 1920s Brighton. There are striped bathing tents, jazz leaking from a gramophone, and a novelty stand selling pineapple-shaped sunglasses. A small sign reads, "Imported from Hawaii, sweet, fun, exotic." Nearby, a child is licking a pineapple-flavored ice lolly shaped like a cartoon crown. This is not the pineapple of Lord Dunmore. This is something lighter, brighter, and far less intimidating. In America, the fruit's journey takes a similarly unexpected turn. You hop aboard a steamship, purely in imagination, of course, and land in early 20th century Honolulu, where the pineapple isn't just a luxury, it's an empire. Names like Dole and Del Monte begin appearing on labels, billboards, and even elementary school booklets. The pineapple industry, one textbook proudly proclaims, brings sunshine to every breakfast table. Here's a delightful oddity. Schoolchildren in Kansas are encouraged to memorize pineapple facts as part of their nutrition units. One question reads, question, why is pineapple the gentleman's fruit? Because it arrives wearing a crown. You can almost hear the classroom groans. Historians still debate whether this mass-market pineapple branding was clever marketing or cultural appropriation, or both. But what's clear is that the fruit's symbolism continues to evolve. No longer a marker of unattainable luxury, it becomes a friendly promise of cheer, leisure, and vacation escape. Back in England, the pineapple finds new homes in unexpected places. You walk past a cinema in Manchester, circa 1935, and find a neon sign flickering the word pineapple above a cocktail bar that doubles as a lounge. Inside, the decor is full tropical. Rattan furniture, plastic palm trees, and soft saxophone covers of Hawaiian lullabies. One mixologist offers you a pineapple highball, served in a hollowed-out fruit with an absurdly long straw. Imported tinned, he admits, still gets the job done. Soon, the fruit makes its way into fashion. Pineapple print summer dresses, bow ties, and even pajamas. You leaf through a 1942 department store catalog and spot Ananas hosiery, cheerful style for wartime gals. Apparently, if you couldn't get oranges, you could at least look like a fruit salad. Here's a quirky little trend. During the post-war housing boom, several British suburban developments featured homes named after fruits, the orchards, Cherry Grange, and yes, Pineapple Mews. In one such street, each home has a pineapple door knocker. Some still remain today, their brass rubbed smooth by decades of greetings. In kitchens, the pineapple enters its golden age of culinary confusion. You're invited to a dinner party in 1956. The hostess beams as she places a ham and pineapple crown on the table. a ring of canned pineapple slices, each with a cherry in the middle, encircling him cubes arranged like dominoes. It's bright. It's jiggly. It's edible. Other dishes follow: pineapple upside-down cake, pineapple glazed meatloaf, pineapple jelly salad with grated carrots, and a pineapple cheese ball with crushed peanuts. Historians still argue whether anyone actually enjoyed these dishes or simply admired the effort. You sneak a glance at a magazine ad on the counter. Make any meal a party with pineapple. A grinning housewife clutches a can like its treasure. A caption adds, "Fresh or canned? Your guests will be dazzled." It's in this era that the pineapple reclaims a touch of its former flair, but now through irony. What was once elite becomes camp. Sophisticated becomes silly. Pineapples start appearing in tiki bars, bachelor pads, and novelty home decor. One famous pop artist paints a series called Fruit Power, featuring stylized pineapples wearing sunglasses and smoking cigars. You spot one hanging in a gallery, right next to a neon sign that simply says, "Ananas, darling." The pineapple is now everywhere and nowhere. No longer tied to a single class or meaning, it becomes a blank canvas, welcoming, familiar, and slightly ridiculous. You pass through a 1970s gift shop in Blackpool and spot pineapple-shaped soap dishes, salt shakers, and a deeply confused-looking ashtray. It's hard to imagine Lord Stanwell putting his cigar out in one. But despite its transformation, something about the pineapple's appeal persists. You visit a cozy flat in London, mid-century wallpaper, tea set on the table, and spot a single pineapple ornament on the mantel. "My nan had one just like it," the owner tells you. It was always on display, meant something to her, never said what. That's the pineapple in its late century form. Nostalgic, ambiguous, quietly persistent. Even now, you begin to sense a cultural looping, a return to meaning. In boutique hotels, pineapple motifs reappear, this time labeled retro chic. In gift shops, welcome signs with stylized pineapples are back in fashion. Etsy is flooded with gold pineapple lamps and "Live, Laugh, Ananas" prints. Historians still puzzle over how one fruit managed such an odd arc, from impossible luxury to tin can staple to icon of postmodern humor. But perhaps it's the pineapple's stubborn visual identity, its unmistakable crown, its strange armor, its promise of something sweet inside, that gives it such staying power. You step outside a high street shop and see a passing teenager wearing pineapple earrings. She's not making a statement, or maybe she is. After all, the pineapple has always been more than it appears. You've followed the pineapple across centuries, from royal banquets to tiki bars, from greenhouse temples to novelty ashtrays. But tonight, as the fog settles softly over a garden wall in Wiltshire, you find yourself thinking less about the fruit itself, and more about the strange human impulse that turned it into a symbol. Because here's the truth, it was never just about taste. You stroll through a dusty country estate now open to visitors on weekends. The velvet ropes sag slightly. The chandeliers haven't sparkled in decades. But in the grand dining room, beneath a cracked ceiling fresco of cherubs and clouds, stands a lonely silver platter. And on it, not a real pineapple, but a painted wooden replica, dulled with age. You ask the docent why it's still on display. "Because it always was," she shrugs. "Even after they stopped growing them, they kept that one out. Guests expected it. That's the thing about rituals. They outlive their purpose." For 18th century England, the pineapple wasn't about fruit. It was a social handshake, a whisper that you knew the rules of fashion, wealth, hospitality, and global reach. If you displayed a pineapple, you weren't just offering food. You were offering meaning. Historians still argue whether the pineapple obsession was a genuine love of tropical produce, or a kind of cultural theater, a way to signal allegiance to empire, refinement, and the right kind of party invitation. Probably both. Maybe neither. But the pineapple persisted, even when its moment had passed. In one crumbling churchyard, you spot a family tombstone carved with a pineapple above the family crest. The stonemason, perhaps unsure of the symbolism, has also added a ribbon that reads, "Abide in sweetness." So earnest, it nearly breaks your heart. You pause for a moment, imagining the Victorian daughter who requested it. Maybe her father grew them. Maybe he just liked how they looked. Either way, he wanted to be remembered with one. And then there are the shipbuilders. In the dockyards of Bristol, a few dry-docked vessels still bear pineapple carvings on their prows. These weren't decoration, they were charms. To early sailors, especially those working the sugar routes or West Indies convoys, pineapples symbolized safe return, exotic lands, and profitable trade. One sailor's journal from 1794 describes docking in Portsmouth to find a friend waiting on shore with a carved pineapple cane. "A fine omen," he writes. "May the tide favor us." Later, you drift through a small maritime museum, where a pineapple-shaped compass case sits under glass. Nobody's quite sure why it's shaped that way. "Maybe to remind them of home," says the placard. Or maybe it was just stylish. But somehow it feels right. Here's a quirky find. In 1832, a theater manager in Bath wrote a play called The Fruit of Fortune, in which a poor clerk inherits a single pineapple and turns it into a series of escalating social invitations. The plot is absurd. The pineapple eventually becomes a murder weapon, but the idea that one fruit could open so many doors landed with audiences. The play toured for 3 years. Back in your imagination, you're seated beside an elderly lady in 1910. She's sipping tea, gently adjusting her hat, and telling you how her mother always kept a pineapple-shaped lamp near the front door. "So people felt welcome," she says, "even when we couldn't offer anything but tea and talk." It hits you softly. That's the pineapple's real legacy. Not wealth, not taste, not even prestige, but welcome. It is and always has been a social key. Something that says, "Come in, sit down, stay a while. We may not have much, but we made this for you." You walk through a more recent home, a 1970s semi-detached with wood-paneled walls and avocado-colored appliances, and find a dusty pineapple candle in the kitchen. Clearly never used, but clearly never thrown away either. You ask the owner about it. "Oh, that? Mom always said it was lucky. Something about kindness and sunshine." She shrugs, but doesn't move it. That's how symbols survive. Not through textbooks or trend reports, but through quiet repetition. Through grandmothers and doormen. Through door knockers and curtain patterns. Through recipes you make once, laugh about, and make again anyway. Here's a fringe tidbit. In one corner of the internet, there's an entire blog dedicated to pineapple-themed ephemera. Tea towels, letter openers, garden gnomes. No commentary, just image after image of pineapple things. The last post simply reads, "They just make me happy." You nod. They do. As the section draws to a close, you imagine yourself back at that grand Georgian table, candlelight dancing off the rind of a perfectly ripe fruit. Not just rare, not just precious, but shared. That's what matters. You wake early, in the kind of dreamscape quiet that only exists before breakfast, and you realize there's still one part of this pineapple tale left to explore. How did the pineapple travel so far, so strangely, and so persistently across cultures, borders, and centuries, without ever truly losing its appeal? The short answer? It adapts. You begin this final leg of the journey not in a garden or drawing room, but in a museum of trade in Amsterdam. The air smells like old wood, lacquer, and dust. One display case features a faded map of the Caribbean trade routes, lines etched like spider webs across the Atlantic. Tiny drawings dot the parchment. Barrels, bundles, and, there in the corner, a squat, spiky pineapple, marked with the label ananas. That word, ananas, is what most of the world calls the fruit. French, Italian, Russian, Turkish, Hindi, Arabic, all versions of the same root, borrowed from the Tupi word nanas, meaning excellent fruit. You find it oddly poetic. In England, it became pineapple, echoing the pine cone it resembled. But in the wider world, it was known by its original indigenous name, a small, stubborn linguistic seed that refused to be rebranded. Historians still argue whether this linguistic divide reflects colonial arrogance or simple botanical confusion. Likely both. The pineapple's first European voyage is thought to have happened in the late 15th century, via Columbus. But its true passport came from the transatlantic slave trade and global plantation systems that spread sugarcane, coffee, and yes, pineapple, across tropical regions from India to the Philippines. You drift through an exhibit on colonial horticulture, where pineapples were more than produce, they were status crops. British-controlled Jamaica, Dutch Suriname, French Martinique all grew them not just for export but as proof of dominion over nature. A kind of leafy crown atop a colonial head. It's a complicated legacy. You walk through rooms that celebrate botanical exchange but can't ignore the pain that often made it possible. Forced labor, land seizure, exploitation disguised as discovery. In Barbados, an old plantation ledger lists tools, seeds, and 24 infant ananas, gifted from Port of Spain. Beside it, a line, 12 enslaved workers to be trained in pruning. The fruit may be sweet. Its history, at times, is not. You take a breath and shift settings. Now you're in Bangkok, strolling through a bustling market at dusk. The scent of fish sauce, ginger, and grilled pineapple wafts through the air. Here, the fruit is less mythic, more everyday. Sliced fresh beside the street, sprinkled with chili salt. No fanfare, just flavor. Here's a fringe detail. In Thailand and parts of Malaysia, grilled pineapple is believed to cool the body, balancing hot foods and reducing internal fire. You smile, thinking how far this is from 18th century England's tongue-scorching surprises. You flip through a cookbook from Ghana and find pineapple blended with cassava and spices into a festive drink. In Peru, it's boiled with cinnamon into a sweet herbal tea. In India, pineapple curry is a summertime staple. In Korea, pineapple pizza sparks friendly debate that borders on theological. All around the world, pineapple has folded itself in, like a traveler who learned the language, wore the clothes, and became part of the village. It's still a guest in many of these places, but a beloved one. You visit a factory in the Philippines and watch pineapples being processed into juice, jam, and textiles. Wait, textiles? Yes, another twist. Here's a delightful surprise. Piña cloth, a traditional Filipino fabric made from pineapple leaf fibers. Light, delicate, translucent, used for formal shirts and wedding dresses. Painstakingly handwoven, revered. Entire villages still specialize in this art. A woman working at a loom tells you, this is the real treasure. Not the fruit, but what it leaves behind. You nod. Back in the UK, the pineapple hasn't vanished. It's in wallpaper again. On tea tins. In summer gin. You even spot it on the corner of a hip hotel's signboard in Shoreditch. A stylized gold pineapple, minimalist and sleek. Inside the lobby, the concierge greets you with a wink. We believe in radical hospitality here, she says, gesturing toward a pineapple-shaped dish of sweets. You think of the old Georgian cook carefully sugaring slices in her manor kitchen. The gentleman in Bath proposing a toast to a wax replica. The plantation worker coaxing a seedling to bloom under brutal sun. The girl on the Brighton beach, licking a pineapple popsicle, unaware she's part of a centuries-long story. The pineapple, this awkward, armored, delicious anomaly, has always been more than food. It is symbol, souvenir, status symbol, social experiment. It means too much and not quite enough, which perhaps is why it lingers. There's a whisper of magic in anything that survives this long without being pinned down. You picture yourself, much older, offering a guest something small and sweet. A slice of cake, a warm drink, a pineapple-shaped coaster under their mug. No speech, no explanation, just that quiet signal. Welcome. You're safe here. The path winds gently now, the final stretch of our journey. As the moon hangs low over quiet rooftops and the world itself seems to lean back into sleep. You're walking past garden walls, wrought iron gates, and old estates where vines clutch brick like time trying to hold on. Every so often, you spot it, the motif that started this whole strange tale. There, a pineapple carved into a stone pillar. There, a brass pineapple atop a gate latch. And there, faint but real, etched into the glass of a front door, refracting the porch light just so. It's everywhere. Once you start looking, you duck into a sleepy antique shop tucked between two shuttered tea rooms. The bell above the door doesn't ring. It just clicks softly, like a polite cough. Inside, the air is thick with beeswax and the sigh of forgotten furniture. On one shelf, a porcelain teapot in the shape of a pineapple. On another, a pineapple print apron folded so crisply it could be a relic. You ask the shopkeeper, a woman with wire glasses and the unhurried smile of someone who lives inside time, if pineapples are popular here. "Oh, darling," she says. "They never left." She gestures to a dusty frame near the till. You pick it up. Inside, a cross-stitch in faded thread reads, "The pineapple is not the fruit, it is the welcome." You stare at it a moment longer than you mean to. Then, like a soft breeze changing direction, your thoughts drift to the ones who never got to taste it. The enslaved workers who cultivated it under brutal sun. The farmers who coaxed them from stubborn soil. The cooks and staff who served it but never touched a slice. Those whose hands shaped the fruit's legend, without their names surviving alongside it. Historians still wrestle with how to tell stories like these, whether a fruit can carry such contradictions. Joy and pain, wealth and struggle, elegance and empire. Maybe it can't. But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe all stories are patchwork. And the pineapples is especially stitched, with silver thread, scorched edges, soft fabric, and a few surprisingly durable sequins. You exit the shop and wander toward the edge of the village, where the streetlights fade and the gardens begin. One last gate, one last pineapple carved into the post. You run your fingers over it. Rough, cold, familiar. Here's one last quirky find for the road. In 2022, a researcher in Bath catalogued more than 1,300 pineapple carvings across Britain. Door knockers, newel posts, fountain heads. She called it an invisible empire of hospitality. You like that. You walk on. In the distance, you hear a soft chuckle, as if from a memory. Perhaps it's a gardener explaining his greenhouse to a baffled guest. Or a hostess bragging about the syrup glaze she used. Or a 12-year-old from Manchester grinning as she hands out pineapple-shaped sweets at her birthday party. Whatever it is, it lingers. You reach the crest of a hill and look out over rooftops. Some have pineapple weather vanes. One has a string of fairy lights shaped like tiny golden fruits. The pineapple's time as a luxury is long gone. Its time as a curiosity? Maybe. But its time as a symbol of warmth, of effort, of generous showmanship, lives on. You can't help but think, if you had to pick just one object to say, "You're welcome here," you could do worse. Maybe it isn't practical. Maybe it's a little silly. Maybe that's exactly what makes it beautiful. And so, under a sky soft with stars, you turn one last time and whisper, "Thank you, pineapple. You were never boring." Word count, 1,061. Wind down, 300 words. And now, with the story complete and the world outside your window wrapped in stillness, let's slow everything down together. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a quiet pond. You're safe here. You're not in an 18th century greenhouse, fumbling with soil and soot. You're not seated at a grand banquet table, nervously awaiting a slice of fruit. You're just here, with the faint memory of pineapples floating gently in your mind. Maybe you're picturing that wax replica under glass, or the sweet smell of grilled fruit from a Bangkok market. Maybe you're imagining candlelight flickering off a pineapple-shaped dish, or the soft scratch of a cross-stitch reading, "The pineapple is the welcome." There's no need to decide what it all means right now. Let the fruit rest. Let the empire sleep. Let the symbols soften and blur at the edges. Take a deep breath in, and let it go. The pineapple, in the end, wasn't just a fruit. It was a feeling, a gesture. A golden glowing metaphor for something we're all quietly chasing. To be seen, to be remembered, to make others feel at home. So rest easy now. Let the story settle like sugar in syrup. Let your breathing slow. Let your eyelids grow heavier. You've traveled across centuries tonight, and the journey is over. Sleep well. You've just left a London dinner party where a pineapple was the uncut star of the show, and your curiosity is piqued. How on earth do people even get a pineapple in England without chartering a whole ship to Jamaica? Simple answer, they build a pineapple palace. Okay, not literally a palace, but close. As you trudge through the damp, gray countryside outside of Bath, You notice a strange building behind a sprawling estate. It's not a barn, and it's certainly not a chapel. The glass glints faintly under the overcast sky, and the brick walls are thick, far too sturdy for any average greenhouse. This is a pinery, a purpose-built, heat-trapping shrine dedicated entirely to growing tropical fruit in the middle of a very soggy island. Growing pineapples in England is, frankly, ridiculous. The climate is all wrong. You know this. Everyone knows this. And yet, driven by pride and pineapple envy, English elites decide to engineer their way into success. Inside the pinery, the air is damp, heavy, and somewhat amazingly warm. That's thanks to a network of flues and stoves running under the floor and behind the walls. Coal fires are constantly tended to keep the temperature around a balmy 85 degrees Fahrenheit. There's also a complicated glass setup to maximize sunlight, even on the cloudiest of English days. As you walk past rows of baby pineapples called slips and suckers, you learn that the process takes 2 to 3 years per fruit. Imagine tending to a single plant for 3 birthdays, only to end up with 1 edible pineapple. It's the kind of horticultural patience you only have if you're already wealthy and bored. Historians still argue whether the very first successful pineapple grown in England happened at Dorneycourt or at the Royal Gardens in Chelsea. The most famous, though, is John Rose's pineapple, presented to King Charles II in the late 1600s. A painting of that moment. Rose, bowing with the fruit. Charles, gazing upon it like a newborn baby, became iconic. You might have seen it without realizing its full absurdity. What's especially funny is that the pineapple in the painting was almost certainly not grown entirely in England. Most likely it was imported partway and ripened in the greenhouse, a bit of horticultural theater. But no one cared. It was about the idea of it. And so begins the golden age of the pineapple pinery. Estate owners compete not only to grow the biggest fruit, but to build the most elaborate structures to do so. You tour one garden where the pinery has ornate Gothic arches. Another has Corinthian columns. One, owned by a particularly flamboyant nobleman, features a fake waterfall. It's unclear whether the pineapples appreciated the ambience. The labor involved is immense. Gardeners wake at dawn to stoke the fires, manage the airflow, trim the leaves, and pollinate by hand using tiny brushes. You meet one named Thomas, who proudly says he's only lost 3 pineapples in 15 years. You congratulate him like he's a surgeon. You wonder, was it all worth it? Well, if status is the game, yes. Having homegrown pineapples is like having a Bentley that runs on crushed sapphires. You don't need it, but once you have it, everyone knows. There's also an emerging science vibe to it. The Enlightenment is in full swing, and agriculture is the new frontier of gentlemanly experimentation. Growing pineapples becomes an academic pursuit. Landowners write long letters to one another, debating soil acidity and insulation techniques. They hold fruit-tasting parties and produce detailed diagrams of their greenhouses. It's botany with a touch of egomania. At one estate, you witness an actual competition. 2 gardeners facing off in a grow-off. Their employers watch nervously from the sidelines, sipping sherry. The prize? A gold-handled pruning knife and lifelong bragging rights. But it wasn't always glamorous. A quirky little tidbit. Some pineries doubled as covert love nests. Since they were warm, isolated, and rarely inspected by the household staff, the occasional tryst was known to happen among the fruit. There are even old servant gossip journals hinting at such scandals. Lady E was seen emerging from the lower glass house in a state of undue dishevelment. Pineapple scandal indeed. Despite their grandeur, pineries were fragile. One cold delivery missed, and the plants could freeze overnight. A cold snap, a broken pane, even a distracted gardener, could mean disaster. That made successful crops all the more precious. You see it in the way aristocrats handle their harvest, like they've been given the crown jewels. And sometimes they really put their pineapples on pedestals. Literally. You come across a garden with stone pillars, each topped with a stone-carved pineapple. These weren't just garden flourishes, they were full-on architectural declarations. The Dunmore pineapple in Scotland, for instance, still stands today. An actual building with a giant stone pineapple dome. It looks like a prank, but it's deadly serious. Pineapples, you realize, were never just fruit in this world. They were architecture, conversation starters, marriage proposals, bribes, and sometimes, if someone was feeling particularly wild, dinner. But more on that later.